Welcome into the 24/7 Sports YouTube page. I'm Emily Proud. We continue to follow breaking news out of Auburn. Bryan Harsin out as the head football coach. Here to talk about it, Brandon Marcello and Carl Reed. Guys, we're going to talk about what's next. Brandon, we have to start with you. You've reported that the top target to replace Bryan Harsin is Lane Kiffin. Now, outside of just offering him more money, what's their sell to pull him from an SEC West rival?
Well, they've got a load of NIL money. They have been busy building the Auburn Boosters and others a big NIL base to help that football program. And I'm told that total has eclipsed $11 million. And that number will only climb as they begin this coaching search. And as we remember, Lane Kiffin has very publicly made some comments about NIL. And in fact, the amount of support they're getting there around the Ole Miss program with NIL, or for that matter, the lack of. Also, Auburn is in need of immediate help on their roster. They are lackluster in depth. They have no superstars at all, and they need immediate help. Lane Kiffin, who calls himself the transfer portal king, is someone who can come in there and immediately provide an upgrade for that team going into next season. Also, new Auburn athletics director John Cohen comes from Mississippi State, has watched and is very much respected what Lane Kiffin has done at Ole Miss. And from my sourcing tells me that Lane Kiffin is the number one priority for them as they move forward here in the early days of this coaching search.
I think Lane Kiffin right away has to be a guy that they put at the top of the list. He has been incredible as an offensive coach throughout his entire career. He has been incredible with recruiting, and he's shown over the last several years that his maturity level has went towards the top. And when he has a guy like Jack Cohen at Mississippi State that heads to Auburn, of course Lane is going to be at the top of the list. Lane has complained about the attendance at Ole Miss. He has complained about NIL. So people would say, why would he make a move from one SEC West school to the other? It's because of those things that Brandon mentioned earlier. As well, if you know Lane Kiffin, he is a hyper-competitive guy, and don't be fooled. He wants a crack consistently at Nick Saban in the state of Alabama. He has that type of intensity when it comes to winning in competition.
Oh, yeah. Iron Bowl press conferences would get a whole lot more interesting. But, Brandon, where realistically do you think Lane Kiffin can take Auburn?
Well, I think he could do exactly what the previous coaches have done there, especially since Tommy Tuberville. They've all competed for national championships about once every 5 years or so. Heck, Gene Chizik won a national championship there, of course, with a generational talent, Cam Newton. And then Gus Malzahn came in there in year one and got them to the BCS national championship game. They won one SEC title. They played for two SEC titles. They knocked off both number one Georgia and number one Alabama in the same year within a span of 2 weeks, as recently as the last 5 years. So listen, this is a job that if you get it going, you can get 5-star kids in there. You can get 4-star kids in there because of the recruiting base there in the Southeast, right there in the heart of recruiting country, for that matter, in this entire country. So I think you get a great coach in there who could do great recruiting, especially in this NIL era. You can win football games there, obviously, but you could also contend for championships. Maybe not every year, but every few years, you can be in the running as a top 4 program.
Carl, from your perspective, where do you think Lane Kiffin can take the Auburn Tigers?
Similar to what Brandon said, I think that Auburn is a school that can compete for national titles. I also do think that with the right coach, they can compete more consistently than once every 5 years. I don't put necessarily Gene Chizik in the same category that I put Lane Kiffin in terms of being a recruiter. A lot of people put a lot of stock in how well some of these guys can coach in X and O, and Lane has shown that he can do that. But in order to stay at the top of the game, and if you look at a game like Florida and Georgia this weekend, what is Florida missing in that game? Big-time recruits. Guys like Lane Kiffin who can consistently recruit at a 4- and 5-star level are going to give their programs an opportunity to consistently win at the highest level.
All right, as if Lane Kiffin wasn't a flashy enough name to throw out. Carl, you got another one for us. Deion Sanders potentially making the jump to the Power 5. How ready is Deion for the SEC?
Deion is as ready as any coach in the country is to coach at that level. Obviously, his exploits as a player are well known, and he's done a tremendous job leading Jackson State in the places that they've never been before. And when you think about what Auburn has added with the NIL program that they put in place with the money, also think of the additional resources that Deion's involvement would bring to campus as well. When you think about him being the top guy in the Under Armour chain for grassroots, and you add the fact that Auburn is the apparel sponsor, that Under Armour is the apparel sponsor for Auburn, that is a perfect marriage. Kevin Plank would get behind Deion Sanders at Auburn in a similar way that Phil Knight gets behind the Oregon program with his Nike brand. I think that it would be a perfect match for those two if it comes to that.
I think Carl just hit it on the head there. One, Deion's ready. I think he's an incredible CEO coach, which you obviously have to be as a head coach, especially in the SEC. He's not just a figurehead type. He does a great job of delegating and hiring bright minds to bring about change within his own staff. And then the recruiting aspect of it, Auburn would absolutely skyrocket under Deion Sanders. And you mentioned the Under Armour deal. Auburn is the flagship school for Under Armour. And I'm exactly with you there, Carl. You bring in Deion Sanders and that relationship he already has with the apparel provider. There's no telling what kind of things they could do there. But again, will the Auburn boosters and the power brokers all be on board with that? And also, is John Cohen, the new AD, on board with that? It's early yet, but I do believe that there will be some consideration for his name, especially if Lane Kiffin very early in the process says, hey, I'm not really all that interested.
You guys both make great points, but both didn't mention the potential for some great Aflac commercials between him and Nick Saban. A lot of connections there. A few more names you both threw out to me before we began this segment: Matt Rule and Mark Stoops. Brandon, let's start with you. Which one makes more sense for Auburn?
Mark Stoops, the SEC connections. He's done a fantastic job at Kentucky. We all know that. He's a winningest coach there. Passing, by the way, Bear Bryant is the winningest coach of Kentucky history just this season. Has tremendous recruiting chops, has built some really good staffs, and has also had some success in the transfer portal. Of course, getting Will Levis from Penn State has been a superstar addition for Kentucky over these last 2 seasons at quarterback. He's someone that I don't know necessarily would be considered right off the bat by Auburn, but he's someone that not necessarily as a backup option, but someone that if they got would be considered a nice, say, triple instead of a home run hire for the Tigers. He's someone who can come in with a lot of experience, has had SEC ties, would do very well with the recruiting. And I think John Cohen is really looking for that. He's looking for someone who has that experience, but also is very, very familiar with the landscape in the SEC.
Mark Stoops is one of those names that's not sexy, but he wins, and winning is very sexy. So when you get a guy like Mark Stoops involved in it, he knows recruiting in the Southeast, which is so important to winning football games in the SEC. Also had a great run as an assistant at Florida State, knows that area very well. Recruiting in the SEC is a blood sport. It's a completely different competition of its own. Nobody has done that as well as Mark Stoops has. To imagine having the chops to be able to consistently win at Kentucky. You give Mark Stoops a job with the resources that Auburn has, and the sky could be the limit.
All right, guys, a lot to think about there, and whoever steps into this job has a lot of work ahead of them as they look to rebuild the Auburn Tigers football program. Thank you both so much for that great discussion. Be sure to keep it locked in to 247sports.com for all things college football all season long.